Brackett, and this is William Ogles, and this is our government and econ teacher here at Sweetwater High School. And we figured that there would be no better teacher to interview at this school about 9/11 than somebody who has actually studied government, so he knows a lot of what went on during the time and a lot of what followed the 9/11 and the attempts to prevent terrorism from further influencing our country. So, Mr. Baldwin, where were you on 9/11?
I was in college, in Maryville College, just right up the road. I was a sophomore, and we were talking off the air, and you were telling me that you were just barely born when that happened, which thanks for making me feel old. So I appreciate that. But seriously, no, I was a sophomore at Maryville College, just right up the road. I remember my roommate waking me up, which I thought he was waking me up to go to class. And I said, "I'm not going." And he said, "No, man, you need to see this." And I was like, "What?" So I got out of bed, and I sat on the couch, and we saw a video of the planes going into the towers. And I asked him if it was real. Is this a movie? Is this real? What channel are we watching? We had it on MTV, and they were showing it. It was on every channel, that always just stood out to me. It was on every channel. The whole nation was glued to what was going on in New York City on September 11th.
So you lived during that time a lot more conscious of it than we were. We were obviously much younger,
right.
So we don't necessarily remember kind of before 9/11.
Right.
So can you kind of describe life during the event, you kind of did just now, but afterwards and how the world has kind of changed? Because that is a monumental event in U.S. history and world history as a whole.
Absolutely, and one of the things that really has stood out to me over time has been, prior to that, the ideas about terrorism and sort of just being wary going in public, being concerned about being in a public place because of terrorist attacks, was not something that really entered our mind in the American culture at the time. Certainly now, even when you go to the airport, that comes to mind all the time, because as you go through, you got to take your shoes off and all that. When I was a kid, you could walk up to the gate. I remember in high school, a girlfriend coming back from spring break, and I met her as she got off of the plane. Now there's no way you're getting past security to do stuff like that. So that's just something minor that's changed. But in the culture as a whole, being more aware, not just of terrorism, but sort of globally what's going on, that has been a big change since 9/11, in that we're kind of aware of what's going on and how other parts of the world are interacting with each other and what their perception is of us.
So, when the towers went down, there was a lot of panic that went on in the United States.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of fear that was going not just through citizens of the United States, but I'm sure it resonated throughout the world, because the World Trade Centers were a huge landmark in the United States.
Well, I think I kind of get what you're going for there, and bring up the thing about fear and people from other cultures and other countries. I was in college and I went to the cafeteria later that day. Some teachers had canceled class that day because they didn't know what was going on. Other teachers said, no, it's got to be business as usual. I remember going to the cafeteria, and everyone was on edge. There was a lot of fear in the air. The tension was palpable. One thing that I found very concerning at the time, still do to this day, is I was standing in the lunch line behind some people, and we have, if you don't know, there are a lot of foreign students, foreign exchange students, if you will, in Maryville College, in particular from Japan and places like that. And I heard people in the lunch line accusing them of 9/11 because, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in 1941, so that was a concern that people had at the time, and I thought that was completely unfounded. People were just already jumped to conclusions. There were a lot of people who were very angry and wanted retribution immediately. There were other people who were just concerned about the well-being of New Yorkers and Americans as a whole. There were other people concerned with what they can do to help. There were other people who were just plain scared of what was going on, and it was a very tense and trying day, and next several days and months that followed, something that I think that America is more or less recovered from in some regards, but at the same time, we still feel that fear today, and it still resonates amongst certain portions of our population to this day.
So you kind of talked about the negative part of 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as a whole, the event is very negative.
Right.
But afterwards, like you're seeing currently with Hurricane Harvey, this outpouring of support and the love and people dropping everything to going to help. Did you see a lot of that then as you do today?
Just like now when you see with the results of Hurricane Harvey, natural disasters, there was an outpouring of Americans, and for the first time in my lifetime, or at least in my recent memory, I felt like Americans were united as a whole. Republicans, Democrats, whatever the divide people want to assign, whatever label they want to put on themselves and assign to each other and to the others. Everyone was on page as being an American. That's something I don't remember feeling really ever, except maybe during the '92 Olympics, when that was right after the fall of communism, and there was a great swell of American pride, and we took a lot of pride in those Olympics. I remember those vividly. And this was the first time since then that I remembered everybody being on the same page about, hey, that other stuff that we argue about during the week, who you're voting for, what you believe, what sports team you like, any of that stuff, none of that mattered anymore. And everybody just came together as Americans as a whole. And it was, if there's any positivity that we can glean from 9/11, I think it would certainly be the feeling of unity and American pride, the power of pride. Those were a big popular bumper sticker at the time that came from that. I think it brought the nation together as a whole. We've since fractured again. I don't think that's telling anybody anything they don't know. But at the time, it was a very unifying thing. We had a very positive unifying factor coming out of such a negative occurrence.
With all of the current events between the tension between countries and internationally, just there's a tension as a whole in the world right now, especially with North Korea and sanctions between Russia and the United States. And with 9/11 being one of the first large attacks to happen on U.S. soil since Pearl Harbor.
The first.
Do you think that people now are worried that something like that's going to happen with all the tension that's going on right now?
I think that's certainly a concern. I think that, as we were saying earlier, even everyday activities like going to the airport and things like that are impacted by those things. One prevailing thought process at the time, if we stop our way of life and stop what we're doing, we're letting the terrorists win, and that's something that America's not going to let anybody win anything. If you're going to beat America, you're going to beat us. But nobody's done that yet, and I don't think that's going to happen. I think that's, to your point there, Will, I think that is something that people are concerned about as far as fear and trepidation. But we are more prepared now than we would have ever been prior to 9/11 for terrorist attacks and things like that. And that's why you see security at the airports. That's why you see increased security at public monuments. That's why you see restrictive policies, perhaps, on who comes in and out of the country. It's a lot. For example, when I was a kid, before 9/11, when I would go to Canada, I didn't even have to have a passport. They just let you in. And now, getting in and out of the country, you've got to have a passport all the time, even to a friendly neighbor that we've really never, the last time we had an issue with Canada was 1812, that was 200 years ago. So, for a long time, good standing neighbor like that, to even have to use your passports and correct papers to get back and forth just from there, I think that certainly says something about preparedness and heightened awareness, I suppose. Maybe there's some type of word like security that I'm looking for. Surveillance? No, I'm not sure. But, yes. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So 9/11 is something that's been kind of memorialized a lot through film, TV shows have talked about it, dealt with it.
They even built the building in
the
9/11
Freedom
Memorial.
Tower,
Mm-hmm.
beautiful monument if you ever get the chance to go. I know we got to go on our 8th grade trip.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely beautiful. Do you think that any of those representations in pop culture, whether it be songs, TV shows, movies, anything like that, really demonstrate the kind of what life was like during that time? Or do you think that you can't really convey that through a medium as effectively as it was when that was the norm, or not the norm, but what was going on at the time?
I think that's an excellent question. I think that there are going to be certain pop culture references, whether it be music or films, that really resonate with people from the time. I don't think it does an accurate job of capturing, I don't think any of the films, television shows, or any of that stuff have done an accurate job of capturing the real, palpable, skin-dripping fear that was taking place at the time. I think the History Channel series about 9/11, did a fairly good job, probably did the best job of explaining all about 9/11 the best they could. I don't think, however, that any pop culture stuff captures it. Really captured. One thing that stands out in my mind though is I think it's an Alan Jackson song, like "Where Were You When the Towers Fell" or something. That's something that was very powerful and resonated with a whole lot of people at the time. That sort of angry attitude, and just sort of, we're hurting, but when this is over, we're not going to be the ones that are hurting the most. And I think that resonated with a lot of people and meant something to them and got to them, both in their heart and in their minds, about what it means to be an American and what it means to take pride in where you live. And I think that's something that America might have been missing for a little while, but I also think that some of that stuff has been probably misguided since then. I think that we did a good job of unifying as a country, but I don't think we've done a great job of staying that way.
Going off of what you were talking about, the fear that your generation felt when the towers fell.
It wasn't just my generation, it was everybody.
It was everybody who was witnessing happen at the time. When people my age and people who are younger than me get into the United States government, which is kind of a scary thought because we're almost legally adults, so we're almost allowed to vote and be part of the United States government. So in a few years, we're going to have a generation who doesn't remember or didn't feel all of the fear and things that happened with 9/11. Do you think that a lot of the movements to eliminate terrorism or things like that overseas will sort of fade into the background of new problems that come up and it will be another issue? Or do you think that we'll kind of continue, sort of continue the legacy that people before us have left about this is what happened to our country, we have to prevent this from happening again?
I think that it's been hammered into your all's heads enough, and there's plenty of other examples worldwide to know that we've had it happen here once. There's places in the world like Israel, France, many parts of the Middle East and Asia, and parts of Europe. This type of stuff is a regular threat on an everyday basis. So I think when we see reports like that, if we watch BBC or if we read Reuters or whatever the case may be, when you see those other things happening around the world, I think that really gives you pause and makes you think, I don't want that happening here where I live. So whatever I have to do to keep that from happening, I'm going to. I think that there's always going to be other issues and things that come up, but I don't think there's going to be the opportunity for something of that magnitude to happen again for a real long time.